Hello, this is Panda Consulting's ArcGIS Pro workshops, and I'm Frank Conkling. Today, we've got a special treat. We've got somebody who's going to talk to us about tasks and rules and what ORMAP is doing. ORMAP is a great organization, and so I'm excited to hear Dean tell us what's going on. I'll introduce Dean a little bit more. I want to go through a couple slides here real quickly. Just remind you, Panda Consulting, go out to Panda Consulting if you really want to know who we are, what we're doing. Like I said, we're actually in our 25th year now. We really enjoy working with everybody and helping everybody as much as we can. If you want to know what events are coming up, we have a separate events page, which actually tells you what workshops are pre-scheduled and what conferences we're going to be at. We also have a linear listing of that on our workshop events page. You can see it then. It also has links to previously recorded workshops. And then finally, you can go out to our Panda Consulting YouTube page. We now have, I think, over 70 videos out there, most of them averaging about an hour in length, some shorter, some longer. And they go over everything you want to know about ArcGIS Pro and Parcel Fabric. Again, I want to remind you that, in fact, Chris with Panda is going to be moderating. So if you've got any questions, go ahead and throw them over in the chat room or in the chat box. Chris is going to let us know when anybody's got any questions in here, and we'll go and break into Dean as we can. Just sort of to give you a heads up, Dean has been kind to go and share with us some of the information, including copies of his slides. And you see there's a QR code there. I'm going to real quickly show you another one. This is for a transaction Python script code. They will be on the YouTube video. So I'll go back to these slides here while I introduce Dean. So as I said, we have a special treat here. This workshop, Dean Anderson with Polk County, Oregon. Dean's currently the IT Special Project Manager for Polk County, Oregon, where he's helping the county transition the current tax mapping system from ArcMap to ArcGIS Pro and the Parcel Fabric. Dean also coordinates the ORMAP statewide digital cadastral-based mapping tools group. Dean has over 40 years of experience in the IT industry and has experience in private, state, local government, and has been on ESRI's Regional Manager, has been an ESRI Regional Manager, IT Director, Public Works Director, Private Contractor, Survey Division Supervisor, Health Services Finance Supervisor, and Research Analyst. Dean, is there anything you haven't done?
You know, I'm old. Done a lot of stuff.
Yes, I completely understand that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Dean go and share his screen, and I'm going to turn off my web. And please go ahead and let us know what's going on. All right. So Dean, take it away.
All right. I'm going to just briefly go through what ORMAP is, and then talk about the tasks and the tools, and then go through a tool script we're working on right now, and would appreciate lots of feedback there as well. ORMAP is short for the Oregon Map. It was created in 1999 from the Oregon legislature, and basically it puts a bit of money from every recorded deed into a special fund that goes to the Oregon Department of Revenue, which then is available for us all counties and others to apply to help convert or develop tools to develop a statewide property tax parcel base map that is digital, accessible, and maintained. If you want to know more, go to the link ormap.net. The vision for ORMAP, again, it's publicly accessible, continuously maintained. Primarily, this is done to support the property tax system. So it does become a property map of Oregon, but really its a primary purpose is support the assessors. In Oregon, the assessors maintain the tax lot map to support assessment, and then that gets used for lots of other things on top of it. And what we're trying to do is comply with state and national standards, and we want to improve it. So in the early 2000s, the ORMAP tools group was created. When we started down ORMAP in Oregon, under the direction of the Oregon Department of Revenue since the 50s, every county has had to maintain assessors maps to a state standard. And we then built on that and said, well, if we all got to make the same map, maybe we should all use the same design. And so when we started looking at using ArcMap to do that, we got a lot of support from Nancy and from ESRI and built a common data structure. And then those counties that had developers in-house decided that we should try to make our own tools as well. And we developed tools for map production, exporting to the state standard, some basic map editing tools. These came was primarily in the add-in environment. As we went farther down the road, we formalized our relationship, and within the rules that Department of Revenue has for distribution of funds, $20,000 a year comes to the ORMAP Tools Committee, which has recently been expanded a lot, so that we can help counties with this conversion process. The Tools Committee is self-regulating. It's made up of GIS programmers. So if you have a programmer in your county that's willing to work on these projects and share the costs of maintenance development, you're on the committee. And we have a formal process for reviewing and doing projects. Currently, we're in the process of upgrading to and operating within the ArcPro low-code environment, so minimizing our add-ins. Our current designs and tools are available on GitHub, and there's the link for that. So that's the intro, and we've implemented a number of tasks and rules and tools, and I'm going to go through some of the tasks and rules process to do that. Tasks, as you may or may not know, for us, it's a good way to collect multiple actions. It's a good way to set a start and end date for a state. So if you're going to start editing a particular feature, you don't have to do a lot of clicks. You can just hit the task. It's a good way to ensure you don't forget steps, and it's a good way to access tools that may not be accessible in Python or with Model Builder, because you can use the record button and click on them. ORMAP tasks we have are add tax lot annotation, add bearing and distance annotation, edit annotation, remove parentheses from annotation, and add CMAPs. And CMAPs are just a piece of text on the border of a map that tells you when you look at a map what is the map next to it. So the tax lot anno tool was created so that you could quickly position a tax lot number and have it automatically update from the underlying tax lot. And I'm just going to click through the video. Here's a particular piece of annotation. We're just placing the text, and it places the word text. When you're done, you go to the next step, and then using Arcade grabs the underlying polygon and assigns the tax lot number. That way, nobody has to type anything in. And we felt that was a faster way than using, for example, feature linked annotation. Tasks are organized by task groups into, I'm going to have to move my, whoops.
Dean, we lost your video.
I lost my video. There.
There you go.
Sorry about that. The share screen stuff was on the front of the slides. Apologize. So you have task groups. We have task groups for each annotation feature class. We maintain our annotation feature classes by scale, because that's how we manage our maps and that's how our cartographers think about it. So we have task groups for each annotation class. Within each annotation class, then we replicate the specific tasks for example, adding tax lot anno. And then within each task, we have the steps. And in this particular case, the tasks associated with adding tax lot annotation is to add the annotation and then to calculate. And obviously, once you go to the designer, there are 4 different components of a task. You can enter the general information associated with the task. the basic documentation about what it is. And then down below, you can select how you want to run the task within the step environment. And then you can tell what map is going to be activated for that particular step, which is all good and also bad. And I'll go through that at the end. And then you can set your contents and decide what is editable, snappable, and so forth. And then the actions that take place are, one way to do it is to select a specific command. And in this particular case, I pressed the record button and went to create, and I selected the create tool. It then told me I had some preset parameters. In this particular case, we have many subclasses within a particular annotation feature class. I only wanted to add in the annotation associated with the tax lot anno. And so I also then displayed which one was going to display. And this just ensured that only the 1 to 100 scale subclass would go. And I apologize, the tax lot anno only has 5 classes. It's the other annotation class that has more. But again, then the user doesn't have to do that selection, and it just makes it run more efficiently. Once that's done, the next step we want it to happen automatically. So as soon as the user says they're done with adding that annotation, which was adding the tax lot step, you kicked on the calculate field. We then wanted to select features that of records created in that task. And I did that twice. And I think in one particular case, something wasn't working. So that's probably redundant. You'll see that my tasks are when starting the step. I'm sorry, I use step and task interchangeably. I'll try to stay with step. And then prior to the command execution. And we also then wanted to verify that if the user did not enter any features, that we errored out and just kicked them out of the task. And having those pre and post actions is pretty cool. In this particular case, I selected a geoprocessing tool from the list of geoprocessing tools. And that's pretty fun because we can run scripts, we can run standard tools and so forth. I selected the calculate field. I selected the that I wanted to enter a specific table. I wanted to update the text string, and I was going to use arcade for that. And it's a pretty simple arcade. I'm going to assign the tax lot layer with the tax lot attribute to the FS tax lot feature. I'm then going to create a new feature called FS intersect map. I'm going to do that by intersecting my added feature, which is referred to as the dollar feature, with the FS tax lot feature. Then I'm going to filter those out. In this particular case, when you click on that and position your piece of tax lot annotation, you could have annotation, or you could have underlying tax lots that are not in the currently active, and that you would have tax lots that have been retired. So we want to filter those out in step 4. And then in step 5, if nothing's found, we just want to return nothing found, and then return the tax lot value if it is found. And then that's what populates the tax lot number into the actual value. And that all seems to work very well and very fast. And that's really what happens.
So,
Now,
Dean,
yes.
I'm going to interrupt you because people know I can't go and keep my mouth shut for longer than
Nope,
about
it's
5
great.
minutes. So one of the things that we've experienced previously is that what happens if you have stacked parcels on top of one another? Because on step number 4, you're looking for the first one that's occurring in here. Sometimes it's occurring according to the first one of when it was created. Sometimes it's stacked on top of one another. Have you run into any problems like that? Or
yes, and in fact, they're in the production version. This is I appreciate you asking that because it hits an issue. One of the things that we've done in the tools committee is that the standards that we've put out there and the code that we put out there are the minimum structure that anybody can use. So it comes with a sample data set. And it's really, if you just want to do the basics, that works great. If you're doing something more complex, you want to have, you can add to it. So we actually, in our task at Polk County, the first thing we grab in that particular feature is that we grab from the underlying record or the underlying tax lot. Well, first we grab from the underlying record the current active record, and we grab the GUID from it. And then so when you position it, we filter not just retired by record as null, but we filter by the tax lot being the GUID of the current active record. So you just add another filter on it or expand that filter to be an N. And that way we're going to grab the first tax lot within that particular one. Now, I don't have stacked like condos, so haven't had to deal with that. But you can add in geographic filters. You can grab in more intersections to really find, to get that down. And that's what we do, is grab it from the GUID of the current active map or active record.
Yeah, perfect. So again, the reason why I asked that, I realized that this code actually works whether you're in a parcel fabric or not. But if you're in a parcel fabric, you may want to go and have some additional filtration going on. So you're only working against the active record.
And here, which is another great point for the committee. So if you load up the demos, what you'll see, it isn't following what you would think or see in a traditional totally fabric contents page, for example, in that our committee wanted to, based on what our users told us, is they wanted to give the samples so that they would run in a non-fabric ArcPro mode or not. And so the data structure is all set that if someone wants to do fabric, they can, but it also then all the tools had to operate in both environments. And so we didn't add more in because those particular pieces wouldn't work if a county didn't want to go to fabric right away. So that's another great example. So thanks for bringing that up. But yeah, you can add on. And in fact, one of the things we found, and you'll see in another step, is intersect doesn't always work as granularly as in a granular manner that you would like. And sometimes when you're positioning a point based on the length of your annotation or whatever, it would pick up the tax lot or the map you're next to. And so we actually used a different tool instead of intersect. And I'll go through that in one of the next examples. Good. So yeah, I mean, it's just arcade and you can just add as much or as you want. In fact, the tool that I have is that if there is a active record on in the task environment, it will then filter with that. And if the active record is not on, it'll take the first one it finds. So not only that, but you can embed it within the decision process that you may have. And again, you just add more if statements and more filters. It's just arcade.
Just put another test in here to see what the count is of inside your filter set and go from there. Yeah, great job. Thanks.
And here's another example. And I think this kind of demonstrates that I get a little concerned when folks call arcade low code. I would call it task specific code because it's still a programming language and it has many of the standard components, ifs, else, then. You can set up lots of different variables and you can make a lot of dumb decisions and make your results not be good. So just something to keep in mind that the arcade can be simple or much more complex. Questions about other questions, Frank or others that may have about just how we're doing tasks? I'm going to talk a little bit more on tasks with pros and cons when I get done with rules, because I kind of look at tasks and rules in a pretty similar light.
Chris, do we have anything in the chat window?
We don't have any questions right now in the chat.
Cool. So I'm going to jump to rules. Rules are a good way to update attributes automatically. It can also ensure the data you're entering is correct. And we were very excited about the constraints rules and have since backed off on them a lot. What we found is our cartographers' rules are more like guidelines when it comes to constraints, and they don't always work in a way that we would like. And I'll talk about that in the pros and cons. But it does ensure that when you're building complex attributes, that you do them in a correct format. And so we have a number of rules. The two principal ones we use are get map number and get map scale. Our annotation for mapping purposes, whether it's our tax lot annotation or our scaled annotation, or some of our other ancillary feature classes that we use to cartographically support the tax map, which is reference lines, water lines, PLS lines, cartographic lines. They need to know what map scale they're associated with for the underlying map for production mapping purposes. And they also need to know the map number. So those are kind of fall into some general categories, as does the tax lot needs to know what map it's in, what county it's in. And then one of the things that we recognized early on in our design is that every county has their own county specific unique identifier for a tax lot. And in our state, our cartographers uniquely identify tax lots, but then we have an assessor account number. That's a 6-digit number. That's different. So, and they develop, and they have internal in our A&T systems across the state have cross-reference numbers that link that 6-digit number that is the account number with the tax lot. So this is something that everybody county has as a map tax lot that's based on the map and the tax lot number for uniquely identifying it. Obviously, that's, well, maybe not obviously, but it's very inconsistent across the state. So what we developed early on in the design is to develop an ORMAP number and an ORMAP tax lot number. And those are standard formatted fields that get populated so that every tax lot is consistently identified across the entire state, which is pretty cool. But it's a long formatted number that no one likes to type. So using rules to update that works really well. So the first rule is what a map number rule does. And when a feature is added, inserted, it's automatically assigned the map number from the intersecting tax map, map index feature class it's contained in. So in this particular case, that example I entered a little bit ago by clicking on the putting text into the two tax lots and sucking up the tax lot number, it also automatically ran the get number attribute rule, and it populated the map number into that particular piece of annotation. And again, this is for map production purposes, is that when we make a map, all of the cartographic and annotation associated with that map has rules about what you see in that map or not. And an attribute rule, you just right click, go to the feature class. In this case, I've got a rule for the 1 to 100. The data design, go to attribute rules. And there are 3 types. We're just looking at the calculation. And I clicked on get map number. The get map number has a description. The 4 components are description, field expression, and trigger. The description, just what it is. If you are going to assign it to a subclass, you can. In this particular case, I selected the field which will be impacted, the arcade expression I'm going to use, and what trigger. And in this particular case, I'm only doing it when the feature gets added. The rules, this should look very, very similar in Arcade to the task Arcade that we just talked about. Step 5 is creating the FS map index feature with the map number attribute. I'm then going to create FS intersect map by using the within function. And this is what I talked about a little earlier, is we found that using within and going the centroid of the annotation more accurately depicted what map the piece of annotation is associated with. I then in step 7, create the map index feature from the first one it found. And if it's nothing, I return nothing. Otherwise, I return the underlying map number. And then, of course, whenever you're running this, you verify your code. And I'm horrible at my syntax, so I probably spend more time in this step than others.
No, I spend, probably at least half my time, if not more, correcting syntax and such.
Yep.
So yeah.
That's my trouble with Arcade, and it's nice that you can copy it from one to the next. The attribute for get map scale is almost identical. And that is when we're using the get map scale to assign the map scale to other features such as cartographic features, reference lines, public lines, survey lines, water lines. They also need to know not just the map number, but we may have different symbology depending on scale, or depending on the scale of the surrounding maps, how we display them or not. And in the get map scale, again, in this particular case, it's all going to be the same other than using the field map scale, but I'm going to also use a trigger for update as well. And again, this should match other than we're grabbing map scale out of the map index feature class instead of map number. Everything else is the same. And again, it's identical for code. And that's the nice thing about Arcade. It's very consistent when it comes to that. So if you can plagiarize things, away you go. And again, one is returning the map scale, one is returning the map number. So those are the basic rules for most of our annotation and then the associated cartographic features. For tax lots, get map number, get county, get ORMAP num, those are the same. We're just grabbing an attribute from the underlying map index polygon, which contains the map number, the county number, and then that standard ORMAP number. The next three rules are going to tell us or do some standard calculations within the tax lot feature class and within that specific record. When a tax lot number is created, automatically I want to update the related attributes using the tax lot number entered, the map number or the ORMAP number from the tax map it's contained in. And in this particular case, if I'm going to change my tax lot number to 401, I want to update the map tax lot from the map number and the tax lot. In this case, it changed it to 47421. And then I'm offsetting the or tax lot number with and putting the map number. And I just flipped it back. And again, it's building that from the ORMAP num and the map, the two attributes. One uses the map tax lot and the other uses the ORMAP num. In this particular case, the rules are pretty standard. Again, more Arcade. Lines 3 and 4 are grabbing the underlying ORMAP numbers and assigning it to variables for tax lot, an ORMAP number. And then if the underlying, if that attribute is empty, is not empty, then I'm going to go do some things. And I want to grab the length of the value that's associated with that particular variable. I then, in this particular case, if the variable is 3 characters long, 4 characters long, or 5 characters long, I want to pad it with leading zeros. And then I just return that as the OR tax lot number and it updates it. In the next one, our internal map number is rather archaic. In 1994, when we designed this, the ability for either the IT director, which wasn't me at that time, for him to make very big modifications to their assessment and taxation system, which at that time, I don't know, was probably in COBOL or some goofy thing. We had to come up with the simplest way to do it. And what we decided was we would just take the dots out of our map number and we would pad it with leading blanks, which, you know, I was involved in this decision. I have no idea why we didn't put leading zeros. But again, that was deemed from 30 years ago, not deemed from today. And I'm sure there was very good reasons. But in this particular case, it's very similar to the code above, other than on line 10, what you can see that I'm creating a variable called map num, and I'm just using the Arcade replace to replace the dots with nothing. And then I'm padding the map tax lot values by taking the map number and padding in the value of tax lots depending on its length. And again, if it's a 5-digit tax lot, there's no blanks. And if it's a 4-digit, there's a single blank or a 3-digit, and there are not 2-digit tax lot numbers. So
by the way, Dean, just sort of to slow you down, give you a chance to breathe, and to help some of those that are trying to learn Arcade a little bit more. If you look at line number 8, down there where he's calculating that, that's a really important function inside of Arcade, the count because it allows you to go and check and see what the length of the field is. It's not like VB where you're looking at length, you're actually looking at the count, which is the length of that line, and then using that to go and figure out what padding you have to do. It's a great algorithm there.
And that's a really good point, Frank. I mean, for me, I'm a Python hack. And I actually, you know, while I'm doing this sort of stuff, I think in terms of Python, but my Python syntax is poor. So I have to keep up my Python website, which I think is from W3 Schools. That's just a great site they've got a lot of tutorials and syntax. And then, of course, I have the function list that I can then translate into Arcade, because it's where you're going between Arcade and Python. If you're a Python person, it's always just a little bit different. And then other times it's exact. So things are interesting that way. Other questions about some of the Arcade rules? And thanks for slowing me down. I get excited and it gets
Hey, I hear you. Well, listen, I'm gonna and Chris, I don't see any questions in there. Is that correct?
Correct. We don't have anything right now.
So I'm gonna have a quick discussion here with you then. One of the issues that you want to be aware of with Arcade is that because you're doing these calculations, and it's really easy to do one of these calculations, you want to think about, if you're doing this on large data sets, that it can be, and let's just put in air quotes, can be expensive. All right, because it's running code every single time. And one of the things that we've found is, Dean, if you go back a little bit more, you've got multiple attribute rules in there. All right, I'm going to go and I'm going to share out one of my screens, and I'm going to cut you off here for a minute, Dean. Hopefully you don't mind.
No, it's good.
So on this screen, this is an expression builder that I have. And if you'll note here on our attribute rules for this feature class, I really have 3 in there, but one is calculating area, one's copying a name over, and the final one is calc multiples. Because this code, if you use JSON notation, you can actually go and calculate multiple values. You can take multiple field values and stack them together. And again, this beginning part of this should look very familiar, but it's just going and defining basically a dictionary here and saying, this is what it is, here's what they are. And at the end, just saying, okay, now return that results of all that variable. And now at one attribute rule, I can go and calculate multiple values and move multiple values around on there. So just a little trick there.
No, I appreciate it. I had not thought of using dictionary within Arcade.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And it gets into more of it, a little bit more advanced, but boy, when you have to start doing it keeps you from having 10 and 12 different rules associated with a single feature class, which does get, one of the things they tell you is you want to make sure you understand every time you execute a rule, it's CPU time, it's access time, it is expensive. So you just want to be aware of that. Okay, I'll let you go back to sharing again, Dean. Thank you.
I'm not, screen 2. There we go.
You got it again?
Sorry about that.
There
So
you
the
go.
other thing I found that is that, especially when you're in editing and you've got version databases or version services that you're using, is that data store. That is not the map. That's the data store where the data is coming from. So you also need to be aware that if you're running your rules while you're in edit mode and you haven't saved stuff, there's limitations about how a data store is used. And I would read the documentation on definitions of data store, because I've had things happen where I have no expectation. So it isn't necessarily from the feature from the map. It's that feature from the actual where the data is coming from. So just something to watch.
Boy, just to reinforce that, you want to recognize that when you've got a feature set that you're calling either by feature class by name, ID, or relationship class, or however you're calling that feature set, there's two different global variables you can put in there. You can either put $ data store, which is actually the data store location itself, or you can do $map if you're going to use this arcade code for like a pop-up and, you know, any of those components on here. But for $data store, you want to know that it's actually the name of that feature class or service. It's not necessarily what it says in your table of contents. It's the actual name. And that's important. Good point, Dean. Thank you.
And $map doesn't work for all functions. And so again, there's some things there that are interesting. So, which kind of gets me to the, well, let me do the last rule. And this is just a great rule I got from Amir, which kind of illustrates some of the things that you can do with this. One of the things that our folks do when you click on a tax lot, you see what records it's in by knowing its GUID, which is that long incomprehensible number. And what our cartographers asked is when they click on a tax lot, and they're good if it's just the tax lot, or when they're trying to figure stuff out, is that they see the record name of the record that tax lot is featured with. So rather than going and selecting the record name, grabbing all the features associated with the record and then seeing the tax lots, now I can just click on a tax lot and you right away know its record name. So we've created a field called, record name. And what I'm doing is I have a calculation rule that uses the relationship class to actually then go grab the record name out of the record and load it back in if it's not empty. And that's just really fun. So it's just another rule. Again, I just copied and pasted this. Amir has this on the community page, which is pretty cool. And it just returns the record name and automatically does the update. And I've got record name as a field. That way, anytime I add a new tax lot, it just updates and it knows it's the record name it's associated with. And I thought that was a very cool rule, and we've added it to our list.
So Dean, again, yes. I can't shut up. So this is really a lot of very useful rule, but we just implemented something like this with one of our clients, and they said, well, what happens when I go to the record and I change the record? Because this only occurs on the individual parcel type that you put together. And you can do it on insert or when you modify that tax lot. But what happens if someone goes back to the record and changes the name on the record because it doesn't get triggered anywhere? So we've just had to go and put in place some new rules on the record that goes and actually it doesn't use the record set by relationship name. It actually does a select on it. And it actually goes and says, anytime you update a record, go out and update every single feature that is associated with that record. And so there's, again, sometimes you have to do it two places just to make sure that it gets maintained in both places.
Cool. And that's a good point, because I'd like to get some feedback on the next section, but I'll just go through some of the pros and cons of tasks. Tasks are phenomenal for smaller directed tasks. It's very little coding. Arcade's pretty simple to use. It's like a lot of other languages. There's lots of examples. There's lots of good tools out there for creating them. The record button lets you add to tasks, which to me is a programmed environment that are things that aren't necessarily accessible in Python or in Model Builder. And by using the record button and clicking on them, I can, for example, select the active record. Tasks can be imported and exported from one project to another. Yay, that's cool. Cons, it's map specific. If you change your map, if you want to use it on a second map, you got to have a different task, which is cool because you can set the tasks to the layers that are in that map. So obviously, if you have a different map, it may not work. And so it's a limitation of the software if you want to run tasks on multiple maps. The second, it's layer specific. So if you're going to, for not all tasks, but if you are going to use functions that, for example, let you update an attribute, that attribute is going to exist in a table. That table's associated with a specific layer. So therefore it's layer specific, so that if you could end up with lots of tasks if you have lots of layers. And that could mean that you've got a lot of updating to do when they want it changed, and it can be tedious. The other piece we found is that interrupting a task can have unintended consequences. And what that means is I actually wrote the tasks, step-by-step tasks, to enter a subdivision following our entire business process. I also did it for processing a deed to do a join. And it didn't work. I ended up with about 15 specific tasks within the subdivision ad group. And what ends up happening is the steps that a cartographer uses are more like guidelines. They want to stop at different places, and interrupting tasks in the middle can have unintended consequences. Starting tasks, if you're going to assume one end state with another, it just is not robust enough to handle the full flow of what we were trying to do with a subdivision. And again, I spent a month plus working with my cartographers as a prototype, just because we're trying to figure out information flow. And we just could not make it happen. It was too constraining for the business process that's there. So just something that we found, and that may be just specific to us.
And Dean,
yep.
Just to let you know, that's exactly what we found, is that we'll often get asked by our clients when we're migrating them into the parcel fabric, well, what about the ESRI supplied tasks? And our response is always that these are really good examples of one way to approach this process. However, they are not flexible enough, because there's too often times when you might need to stop one and move over and go back a couple steps, and it just wasn't flexible enough. That really the best thing that you can do is just learn the tools, learn the process, and learn the tools, and that way you have all the flexibility you need. I applaud ESRI. It's a great way to teach people in the very beginning, but they are crutches. They're just, it helps you in the beginning, but then once you learn how to do it, you'll probably abandon them and move forward.
We have found that tasks that are anything that I'm looking at, something I do most of the time, a lot of the time, all the time, and it's 4 different commands that I do, and I do them the same way. Collapsing them into a single task is great.
Yes.
And that has worked well. And it's also, again, my users find that all of the buttons associated with working on a specific record that I could mess with programmatically and with Python, I can't really do because I don't have access to them. The tasks are a way to pick up some of that. So those are sort of the things that we have found. Rules are really great for calculating default values and following. Again, it's very simple coding. Editing and maintaining rules is pretty quick. Importing, exporting. In fact, I just did one where I had a rule that I needed to propagate across several layers. You can export it and then import it to each one and avoid all the coding. It's tied to databases, so it's independent of projects. And again, they can be imported and exported from one database to another. That's pretty fun. However, we were very excited, and especially with the constraint rules, and that we did all our prototyping in the tools committee before we got our SDE and our versioning services set up. And of course, once that's done, the real issue about a rule is a rule, which means admin people manage it. which is anybody who's using the geodatabase in a single geodatabase user environment. However, when you run into SDE and versioning, only admin folks can turn it off and on. And you have some real constraints there. So think about rules as always on. It can be layer specific. So if you're going to replicate the rule across lots of layers, it ends up being that you're going to end up with lots of rules. And like I say, we have turned the constraint rules completely off. It only has to happen 1 out of 10 times, and we just can't use them. It's much better to what you would think of to do in a constraint rule. You can do within tasks or within tools, just seem to be worked better. And again, because it's tied to a database, depending on some of the flexibility you have by having multiple project files out there to do different related tasks, they're all going to be constrained by the same rules. So again, rules, we had to really realize that rules are not guidelines, rules are rules. So the other piece that we ran into that happens way too often is when a rule is enabled and you're going to do large geoprocessing tasks, they'll kill you. They just take forever. So that, for example, if I had 5,000 tax lots set, or I'm appending tax lots to a database and I have the tax lots rules turned on, every single polygon is going to implement the rules. And it just really slows the process down. So whenever you're going to do larger geoprocessing tasks that impact layers that have rules, turn the rules off. And that just, again, it's just something we ran into. And a lot of times when we're setting something up, we'll be testing a rule, forget that it's on, and then go back to playing around with the data as we try to do imports and crash and burn, and then remember that, oh, that rule's still on. So something to keep in mind. So just some things about rules we found.
I tend to agree. I really wish that there was a way for you to just globally turn all the rules off at one time, but there isn't. But you're right. There are issues. Can we talk a little bit more about? I'm going to turn my video on.
Just before you jump off that, Frank, I do have a script that does an enable off or an enable on for all the rules in a database.
Oh, do you?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I'll have to look at that.
Put it there. Yeah, I mean, basically, it just does a list layers in a geodatabase, and you have off, and it walks through constraint rules and so forth, just turns them all off, and then it's got the corresponding, and it just walks through them all, and it turns them all on. So, yeah.
I'll have to borrow that from you, Dean. So, talk about constraints a little bit more, because a lot of us are very excited about them, but I find very few people are actually using constraints. What we have found is that when you have a rule that requires a constraint is met, it prevents you from doing anything else, right? And that you'll be editing and you'll think you have to do something, and it'll remind you and say, no, you have to do this. And it won't let you proceed any further without it. And if you cancel out of it, you lose anything that you've done up to that point, all right? So can you talk about what you find the differences are between having a constraint rule, or, as I've seen in some of your code, you have an error built in there. Interesting that you have that error message built in. What have you found? And is that any more efficient than just going and having a constraint rule in place?
You know, we were all excited about the constraint rules and have them. And in fact, they're still in the sample data set. I have to always remember to turn them off, because that automatic rule turns them all back on. And then suddenly I've got constraint rules turned on. And actually, it was Ben and John up in Clackamas and Washington County. They went to SDE before we did. And they just said, look, we've turned them all off. We can't figure this out. It just doesn't work for us. And I was kind of like, oh, come on. You're just not pushing it hard enough. If you have a constraint rule and you have options that let you bail out, then it's not really a rule. And having those rules turned on you can't turn them off and they stop stuff. And if you've got the rule turned on and you're in a task, you don't see the rule. It just says task didn't work. You have no idea why. And until you actually go select the field or go select the feature and do something, that's when you get the error. So constraint rules within a task are just horrible because you have no idea why. And so we've just said, we're not doing it. We've turned them all off. What John has been able to do is looking at the tasks as a way to, because your tasks are kind of bracketing smaller functions, is maybe use tasks as a way to do something similar to rules. And what I've found, this goes back to the ArcMap and even the ArcInfo days, is I have tools that look at the data and scrub it. So for example, if you're getting set to go in and finish up an edit process, if you've got a version ready to go, you run an error check on it. And I'm very excited. I haven't done it yet because I'm not that far enough in our process. Validation looks far more interesting than constraints. I'd rather validate and tell them, oh, go fix this stuff. And I may have a different tune later, but yeah, it's just something to look at.
Well, it's the difference between being proactive and reactive. Yeah. And it's the same way with topology. It's the validation is similar to validate topology in that you're very reactive. You're letting it go by and only really checking for it afterwards. So it's not something that occurs at the time of edit, but a chance for you to go and fix them and look at them later. So
and that's how we've implemented all that stuff. So yeah.
Good. Do you have any more slides?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I want to get to my quick one. I'll go through. Anyways, you can look at the slides. All of the resources I typically use for stuff are there as associates with rules, community pages, videos that I like to watch that kind of remind me of things. So as I said earlier, that's the basics. And then everyone builds on top of that. And one of the things that I'm very excited about, and I know we're getting short on time, and I'd like to maybe offline, if you can let me know, is that what we found with transactions, and we operate with a transaction environment within ArcMap, and before that within ArcInfo. So I have a lot of transactions over time, and we don't let transaction names be changed. And a transaction for us is any map change. And in our particular case then is a transaction will have one named branch version. A transaction will have one ArcPro active map, just so you can make sure you're keeping track. And one transaction will have one parcel fabric record. That parcel fabric record becomes the primary record. And one transaction can have multiple secondary fabric records, depending on processing options the cartographer will add to it. But all of those records will be associated with that version. And the primary, so you know what you were editing on, is going to be the record. And that record name will have the same name as the branch version. And we actually are going to save our branch version names with the tax lots, so you know what version it came from at some time in the past. Again, not sure if that...
So Dean,
yep.
I'm going to ask you to put a thumbtack in this, because
yep.
I'm going to ask you to come back. This workshop tends to be focused more on pro, but we do have specific ones for the fabric. And I might have you come back and actually give us a more in-depth on how you manage transactions, if you don't mind.
No, that'd be great.
Okay.
Again, this just the idea is this just, if you want to look at the slides and the associated script. But basically what we're doing is I've embedded all of the things associated with records into a tool and have a consistent way that you can name your version. And I think the real issue is if you look at the right-hand side of this screen, you can see the transaction name is T64-25-. That's the map the transaction's associated with. And then on the right-hand side is the document number, which it's named. And that way We have the names for all of them.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's use that as a teaser. And
Sounds good.
let's have you come back and give a more in-depth analysis as that. All right, let me go in and share here. All right. And so before we go any further, Chris, are there any questions out there or anything in the chat window?
Not currently. The only question we had was at the beginning of the presentation, and that was from Mark, and he was wondering if you could post the links to Dean's slides in the chat window. I attempted to, however, the link did not work.
Okay, and so I think we'll take that offline. And Mark, if you want to stick around, I'll go and I'll give that to you and see if that will help. After that, let's just unmute everybody and see if we have any questions or anyone to go and let's thank Dean for a great presentation. That's really helped us a lot, really. So anybody have any questions for Dean on this? Any comments on this?
And if you've seen something you like to see better, I really appreciated the arcade where you're using the dictionary in the arcade. Had not thought of that before. That is a very fun way to do attributes.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
yeah. That's so, yeah, again, you can experience here. We're sharing with one another. We're helping one another learn. So yeah, there's a lot of creative ways that you can tackle these jobs, and it's not just one way. So, all right, well, with that, let's go ahead and end the workshop and thank everyone for coming, and thank you, Dean, again. And we're gonna get you to come back again and give us something about the transactions. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, I think the real issue for me on the transactions, yeah, any feedback I can get from folks would be very much appreciated.
Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.